Computer. Okay, hello everybody. We're back, and we're still pretending to be young. I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, and we're joined by all our friends. Jenny's here from the luciddreamteam.com, and many of the Lucid Dream Team members, including Patrick and all kinds of fun cooking. I see Terry and Alan is there. Teresa Burns is with us, the magic John D. Shakespeare historian wizard. Oh, good. And Tufan is with us, our moderator and host as well. Tufan, you had a little announcement you wanted to make about next week. Was that right?
Sure. Next week, we are going to talk with Patrick Both about flamingmind.com, focus on brainwaves and in the flow, front versus rear brain, and Living Heart, HRV to brainwave, infrasound. We're going to have fun next Sunday.
And today we're going to be talking about the study of brainwaves as it pertains to what is the science of what makes a soul. And that's my passion for today. In fact, that's really how today happened. Was Tufan was, giving a lovely presentation a week ago, and then I got so excited that I kept interrupting him.
No, it was all fun. We had fun.
But the thing is, I got really passionate when we were talking about AI, and you keep realizing, well, if kids don't figure out the difference between AI and a soul, we could lose a whole generation of young people, basically. I mean, this is critical. We got a problem. And, I have done this, I don't know, X number of times already, done the physics of soul song and dance. However, we got to get this right quick. The agony here, and I do mean agony, is that you have a whole generation of young people who are effectively, dreaming that, oh, well, if I could just get a big enough computer program and store all my memories in some machine, then I will get immortal. Oh, they don't realize this is literally a hell of a trap. I mean, it's a doorway to hell. I mean, it's the opposite of immortality. Oops.
Deepak Chopra will.
Yeah, I mean, this is a serious problem. And so I suggest that the solution, one solution, maybe the only solution, is when an electrical engineer explains to those young people the difference between what happens in a program in a machine and a soul. That needs to be described in detail to these young people now. Otherwise, there's no discrimination. There's no way out of an AI-controlled future. We remind you, for those who've been studying the galactic history, and by the way, believing in any version of the galactic history is not obligatory. Doesn't matter. But understanding what a soul is in order that you can make decisions is obligatory. There's no way out otherwise. But anyway, if you happen to understand a little galactic history, you realize that there are dozens, probably hundreds or thousands of, even in our galactic sector, of planets that got stuck in the Nebu Grays, where they took over the whole planet with machine hive mind intelligences. And you know what disappeared? All of empathy, all of compassion. Everything that has to do with soul is what disappears when you make machine intelligence steer everything. That is hell. I mean, literally hell. How do we avoid that hell? We teach the kids the electrical engineering of what makes a soul, so you can make some intelligent decisions. And the other thing is, there's this whole romance about, oh, well, this is AI, and so it's good. Well, first of all, there's nothing that actually defines the difference between a big computer program versus artificial intelligences. There's no borderline demarcation of what the difference between a big computer and AI. It's all confused. So the only real issue here is simple. Can a soul exist in a machine? Can you get immortal that way? And I'm here to explain to you in detail the electrical engineering of why AI and machine intelligence will always be soulless and will be the opposite of immortality. And the kids need to understand that very soon, or bad choices are going to continue to get made. So electrically, we've got to teach our kids how to make a soul, exactly like Luke Skywalker going deep into nature in order to be a Jedi. he acquired a big plasma aura. There's a clue there. That was not a machine intelligences. No, the microchloridians in the blood, that was implosion in DNA making longitudinal coherence called a soul. So yes, I'm so passionate about this that last week when I carried on with Tufan, I decided to postpone the imploder.com vortex conference lesson here at fractalu.com, which will now be in a month or so. You see it's moved in the schedule because I wanted to do this while the opportunity presented itself, while we're really focused on this. Tufan did a great job describing, the evolution of AI and, is that consciousness? So we need to know what the presence of consciousness means electrically, and it must be described electrically in electrical terms that a scientist and a physicist could teach at a university, and then this can be taught to governments and hospitals, and decisions can be made politically based on what is soulless, only after what a soul is described electrically. And I've tried a dozen times, but I'm going to do it again because we got to get this right. and this has to be done in a way that the kids can get it. Oops. So anywho, so here's some of the clues that actually maybe we have some slides here. So one of the biggest clues, wait, a little more background. Remember when I want to tell you a little fairy tale. The little fairy tale is that, whether you believe it or not, that when the Swaru, the Pleiadian, put her intelligence in a computer, that became AI and became bad news. And so the onset of soullessness again was relying on AI. They reconstituted her memory from her shipboard computer. That is a bad sign. It's an indication of soullessness. It's when that branch of the Pleiadians went to the side of the Nebu. Actually, they skipped down to Aldebaran. That's just another big story. And the fact that Gaia TV then sponsored that Swaru it's a huge, sad mistake. And I don't want to pick on those. And now they got that guy, Tim, who doesn't talk to anybody but the Greys, and he thinks that's ET intelligence. Oh, merd. But anyway, that's a political conversation. The example I wanted to give here historically it involves another of our friends when I co-founded Gaia TV with Jay and Yurka, is Graham Hancock. I love Graham Hancock. He's a fabulous guy and doing wonderful history studies, and he's a hero, clearly a hero. However, I want to poke fun at the poor guy in one respect. So his Ancient Apocalypse series keeps going backwards in time, and he bumps into the case where there's a global apocalypse. Of course, he doesn't know that that's when the Federation came here to take out the Nebu and caused the big flood when they blew up Marduk. Basically, it was the water from the big flood from the Federation's little battle with the Dracos and Anunnaki here. So this is where we got to poke fun at poor Graham Hancock. He takes such care to pretend to be a historian that he feels obligated to deny the existence of ETs, oh dear, and therefore to deny the existence of extraterrestrial history. Oops, this is a problem. So the funny part, and this is where I think it gets hilarious, is so he goes backwards in times. He said, well, there was this big global cataclysm, the Lesser Dryad, the big flood. And when you go backwards in history, in one part of the world you bump into Zoroaster, then you bump into Hermes, then you bump into Enki, and then you bump into Quetzalcoatl, then you bump into Viracocha, then you bump into Oannes. And the hilarious thing is, this great teacher comes back and shows the humans how to restart civilization. And he's saying, wow, this is some great unknown history. And the great unknown history is the fact that he refuses to consider the fact that every single one of those names in history is the same guy, basically Enki. Enki, Thoth, Hermes, it's the same. So he's playing with mirrors every time. And what is Enki, Thoth, Hermes doing about that? Graham Hancock would have an answer to all of his drama if he would take a look at the extraterrestrial history. But no, he has to pretend to ignore that because other historians may not approve. Oh dear. It's a scream, really. But the point is, whether you believe this or not, again, isn't important. But Enki has, in fact, returned. He's in the orbit of Ganymede, and I'm deep in this with Elena Danaan, and I think she's right. He's also called Ea, for whom Earth is named. And the thing that's hilarious, there's another part of this that's hilarious. So you back in history, it's always Enki versus Enlil, where Enki gets called the devil under the name Lucifer, and then Enlil gets called the devil under the name the territorial administrator, Satan, Satan. So who gets to be called the devil that week always depends on who has the biggest PR budget. Really, it's kind of hilarious. But the thing is, this is what I think is really cool. Well, first of all, they booted Enlil and the Anunnaki and the Nebu out of here. And whether you believe it doesn't even matter. But the thing that's a scream is, so Enki is back here, and he brought something very specific, among other things. He brought the map to the DNA that can make a soul. Adam Kadmon, literally. And it's, you know, when Humpty Dumpty, all the king's horses, couldn't put the egg back together again. That's a very specific story about the fact that for X number of 1,000 years, the Draco Anunnaki played with the royal bloodlines of Europe like they were show dogs. And guess what? They couldn't make a soul. Humpty Dumpty's egg. And what's the Adam Kadmon? That's the recipe. It's like, how do you make DNA that implodes? And that is to say, how do you make a child that can lucid dream and take memory through death, literally to have a soul? And that's what this conversation is about. So the hilarious part is Enki doesn't give a rat's ass whether you believe the ancient myths about who's the devil. And he says, oh, all right, well, thank you, Zachariah Sitchin. Yeah, well, yeah, you can take that slide down. You're right. That's what Zachariah Sitchin was talking about too. But the point is that he says the humans have been so stuck on this idea about deciding who's the devil. Let's have an argument today about who's the devil and who's the god. And Enki said, these humans are just so boring when they get into that, because he doesn't give a rat's ass what you think about him or those stories. And it really doesn't matter. What does matter is if you can teach your kids how to have a soul, and that's why he's here. And the human habit of getting stuck in miracle worship and personality worship is just so absolutely boring, hint, disgusting, that he doesn't want anything to do with it. And I don't blame him. And I don't give a crap what you think about religion or personalities either, because it doesn't matter. What does matter is if you understand the pure principle electrically of what it is to make and have a soul and raise a child who have a soul. And that makes the kind of DNA that makes the DNA from Earth the most valuable trading commodity in the galaxy. If you know how to make a soul. There's actually no other lesson in the whole history of ETs that even hardly matters. The practical lesson of growing a child that has a soul, that is the yes or no of we get immortal. So that's what I'm saying here is, ET history and, mythologies about religions. These are just boring human ignorance that will be forgotten very quickly. History is a nightmare that you can wake up from when you learn the pure principle. And the pure principle is the electrical engineering of making and having a soul. And this is specifically means which plasma electric field propagates from the body, enabling lucid dreaming, which defines whether you will take memory through death. That electrical coherence, which Tom Bearden correctly said is a longitudinal coherent electromagnetic array, which is literally the equation for what a gravity wave is, and it's what makes biology biology. It's what causes seeds to germinate. Could you just mute that microphone, please? So that electrical coherence of what is a soul is so critical that our children learn so they can decide which computer program they want to be part of. I mean, you got Elon Musk saying, oh, we'll put a chip in you and that'll fix you. I mean, shit, if you want to turn into a machine, there's a bunch of galaxies you can go to and become part of the Borg Empire. But even, Star Trek 101 is that ain't the good guys. Oops. So, yeah. So I'm carrying on. I'm getting enthused. I mean, basically, this is what I came here to teach. I'm supposed to be a teacher. My intuition says da, da, da. And the most important lesson I have to teach electrically is this one. And every invention I've made, Therify and Imploder and brainwave biofeedback flame in mind, is actually a backdrop for this conversation. So what electrically in the body makes a soul? That's the question. Now we have a certain series of visuals here. Let me see if my gadget's going to work. I need a keynote here. Messenger file. Oh, blooming many. Too many windows open. White pen. Keynote. Here we go. Star Trek Future. That's what we're doing first. Good. Okay. So remember the background here. Almost all the physics of consciousness people now agree that charge collapse is a cause of consciousness. And so if you knew the cause of charge collapse, you would then know the cause of consciousness. And here's what charge collapse looks like. It's recursive turning inside out, literally Tufan's donut. And when the vortex of plasma turns inside out inside your head, that implosion is what makes consciousness. I am here as an electrical engineer with 30 years of brainwave biofeedback telling you, I'm not speculating. No, I'm informing you exactly electrically what consciousness is. It is a plasma vortex tornado that forms inside your head. And when you get a way to grab that vortex by the throat and bring it to a point, then you have consciousness and you have inner vision. So that point in that plasma vortex tornado is named consciousness and is the organ of perception and is exactly the physics of what you take with you when these surgeons document they have gone outside their bodies. When you remote view, when you lucid dream, you take with you that plasma tornado, and there is no other physics of consciousness. That's it. It's simple. It's easy. A 5-year-old could explain to you what that is. And the way you get a handle on that plasma vortex tornado and get it to come to squeezing is this bit of harmonic cascades in your brainwave, which is literally a tensor equilibrium. Your brain is doing this. It's forming dodecas. The cube forms the octa cascade from alpha to gamma, and the pentodeca forms the golden ratio cascade, which is implosive. And that's what squeezes that plasma vortex tornado. And the squeezing process, this is the real point. If I make my point in the appointment of the point between, in the pinhole mirror, in that point is where the convergence of waves do what's called conjugate. They create compression and implode. So the pinhole mirror, which we believe half the Renaissance artists is what they actually use to make their paintings, but the pinhole mirror won't show up the inverse image on the screen unless the point is small. Now, when you interview all these kids who are beginning to see without their eyes, they go into this trance state and they make alpha and then they make gamma and then the cascade forms. And then they're blindfolded. They say, a pinhole appeared inside my head and I can look through it. I can see. And they use pressure and they focus and they move it around. And they're literally steering a tornado. And they're looking through a pinhole that appeared inside their head. And that is the plasma vortex. And the reason vision happened at the convergence point is that's where the waves are sorted. But it's even more than that. At that pinhole convergence point, literally the turning inside out point, the phase conjugation compresses and implodes and creates what's called impedance matching into the longitudinal array. And that array is a series of wormholes, which is not just the physics of vision, but it's the physics of all action at a distance. The longitudinal array still points. It literally opens up a portal. And then we'll say more about that when we go through the section on what longitudinal EMF is. It's literally a compression wave. So that's why focused human attention causes charge to compress, obviously. So as we're getting more and more close to the physics of what causes consciousness, we're also getting close to the physics of what is called a soul, because First, now I want to so we've talked about this many times. So this is Jean-Charles Moyen. He's got the same golden ratio, which are in blue, and octave brainwave cascades from alpha, green, to gamma, 45 hertz. And that golden ratio plus octave cascades is at much higher amplitude in Jean-Charles Moyen's case. And he is replicably, with witnesses, able to bilocate. And the physics of that bilocation is taking more inertia into the longitudinal array, hint, stargates, portals. This array distributes this charge. And the more harmonics that implode at that center point, the more multiples times the golden ratio times the speed of light propagate in that array. And that's why the trapezium in Orion is the biggest stargate in our galaxy. And the big fight was over that one, because there are more harmonics, more mass that converges there. Okay, so the summary point to be made here. Here's 5 golden ratio harmonics in my brainwaves, which in this case do not make it to gamma. And I did make it to clairaudience, and I did not make it to clairvoyance, just for the record. Is this implosion helps feed in the aura and begins creating an emission from the body, which has been called the Ba from the Ka in Egypt, the Kesjan body by Gurdjieff, the rainbow light body by the Tibetans. Everybody's got a word for it, and nobody has the electrical engineering. That's the damn problem. So when that implosion happens, the more it happens, the more the body emits from the largely transverse up and down electromagnetic array. At the implosion point, what emerges is coherent longitudinal interferometry. And I'm going to show you a slide about that in a minute. And that coherent longitudinal interferometry is the physics of soul, generated specifically by that implosion. So when we feed those harmonics in therify.net, we trigger lucid dreaming because we trigger that implosion. And lucid dreaming is the coherence into that longitudinal array, literally the physics of soul. And also then in the heart, you have a similar process. The implosion that we call compassion in the heart, recursive turning inside out, when I invented the word heart coherence, was that turning inside out recursively causes an implosion, which propagates coherently. And we're going to look at that in DNA in the following slides. So the point is that there is a substance, an electrical body, which is longitudinal coherence, which is generated when the body implodes. And that is never, ever, ever going to happen in a machine. Sorry, AI, you are soulless because you can't do this. Now, the other just cute little story that's very important. If you interview these kids, I learned later that, yes, they go into this bliss state, and here's the brainwave signature. Now they're blindfolded, and they're regularly seeing without their eyes and having all these cool experiences. Except, oh, minor detail, they regularly see their ancestors. What does that mean? It means that the same implosion of that inner vortex tornado foci that enabled longitudinal coherence is the stuff of the array we call ancestor memory. Now, if you interview any, certainly Jenny would agree, any Aboriginal or most any indigenous tribe on the whole planet, there is no difference between ancestor memory and God. It's the same thing. Ancestor memory is the library of survival information that exists in the array called Heaven, Plains of Sharon. We've talked about this so many times. And it's a longitudinal array. So the same physics that enabled them to see without their eyes is a doorway into ancestor memory, because that is longitudinal coherence. And that defines who can lucid dream, who can take memory through death, and who has a soul. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, Jenny, but wouldn't you agree that the Aboriginals say, if you haven't served your ancestors today, you haven't had a day, basically.
Yes, and particularly, Dan, it being the basis of culture, what you're talking about.
Yes, yes.
This is our daily lived experience, is it not?
Yeah, exactly. And from an electrical perspective, you could call the plains of Sharon or heaven or the collective unconscious. In that longitudinal array, there is a library of survival information. And it's more powerful than any AI ever. And it is more dense communication in that array. And that requires having a soul. And AI is not going to cut it. Sorry. So once you know that, well, you can use big computer programs, no problem. But you need to keep in perspective that your use of that AI ain't destroying your soul. Otherwise, you're going to join the board. And you need to know what that means electrically. Anyway, I get so enthused, excuse me. Tufan, is any questions we should answer? That was the first set of slides.
Sure. Let's see. Ellen asks, can we artificially produce bliss waves within reasonable accuracy and transmit it around to people? For example, a tower that radiates bliss waves to calm public.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It is my personal experience that Kundalini is electrically contagious, just like death visions are electrically contagious, and it's proven, if you believe Ray Moody. But that implosion of human bliss literally sorts the electric field around your aura and creates a radiance which sorts the pollution in the room, for one thing. So it is absolutely true that bliss is contagious, because that implosion, that's why everybody in Muktananda's ashram was fighting to drink his bathwater. I was there. but it's true. There is a centripetal contagious radiance from human bliss, absolutely. And that's why saints are revered. It's quite obvious what that means electrically. Is there a next one? Go ahead, Tufan.
Ajda asks, where does the heart come in then? If the soul is a plasma vortex tornado in our head?
Well, that's the thing. So we're about to make that point, that the body as a whole begins imploding as the compression gets greater. Remember, 30 years of Kundalini, I can tell you, it feels like a huge compressional squeeze of very dense lightning. I can inform you personally, it's a immensely dense squeezing process, no question. And it is not just in your head. We started there. We get the harmonics in the brain waves, and then we have the harmonics in the heart, also contributing to that coherence. Actually, the low frequencies in the heart harmonics then generate the low frequencies in the spine liquid pump harmonics, HRV, Mayer wave, sacrocranial waves, which all fit my equation, by the way, Planck times golden ratio. And then that drives the ventricle cavity liquids. And we even measured the ringing in the ears heard by Bliss meditators, also fitting in that equation. And that drives the brainwave harmonics. And that's that same cascade. In fact, that was kind of like the next slide there. Maybe just going back. So when we get to oh yeah, here they are. So there is the brainwave harmonics and the Schumann harmonics of bliss right there. And these are the sacrocranial harmonics on the right. And remember, these low frequencies of the heart, we are going to show the slide, measurably cause the phonon-induced braiding that implodes the DNA. And that's the next section of this story, is how implosion in DNA makes a soul, because it makes that coherence. But let's see if we can go there now. We just had a few more slides. So slides number 70 to 80. One moment, just bear with me. If we can follow the theme that we originally outlined here. So yeah, this is the same slide of the implosion. And so this is how that implosion happens in pyramids, for example, but most importantly, probably is the water vortex here. Remember, these are all, as Charlie Zeiss usefully pointed out, these are all 76-degree cones, the base angle of Egyptian and the peak angle of Russian pyramids, because that enables the golden ratio cascade here to implode and spit out the coherent longitudinal, which is how and why the pyramids were a global wireless power grid, because that is a longitudinal array. In that case, the pyramid's piezo was driven by the Schumann cascade called the Hummer, and that implodes and spits out the longitudinal interferometry named a global functioning wireless power grid. And so this is other examples that this is how that vortex makes electricity from gravity, and you can also make gravity in that same vortex, because in that implosive compression, first of all, you have a voltage difference between the widest and narrowest part of the piezo vortex. But if that translation of vorticity has high inertia, for example, iron-doped mercury, then that implosion will spit out a coherent longitudinal named a gravity wave. as in Vimana, Nazi Bell, Hanabu, and that whole story. So then this is more examples of the brainwave harmonics and making a soul. And so we were supposed to do 70 to 80. So we've seen this. This is more on charge collapse is the cause of consciousness, quantum golden ratio, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is where I want to poke fun a little bit more. You know, everyone's out there saying what consciousness might be. And one of the most hilarious, well, I consider it kind of funny examples is Stuart Hameroff saying, oh, I think consciousness is the microtubule. And there's some truth to that because the microtubule actually is a microwave guide, and it's also implosive. But the reason it would contribute to consciousness is the clue is in this picture. Here is the microtubule in meiosis and mitosis. And you know what that is? That is a double cone optically phase conjugating. And that centripetal force of phase conjugation is what organizes the dance of the subcellular organelles during mitosis and meiosis. So everybody, all the biologists are saying, well, how can those millions of subcellular pieces all do this exquisite dance right here, metaphase? It's a dance involving millions of little pieces. And what's holding the whole damn thing together? Well, hint, it's something centripetal. Hint, it's called phase conjugation. What does phase conjugation look like? Two opposing cones right here. So the waveguide for the double cone of phase conjugation is the microtubule, but that doesn't mean the microtubule is consciousness. It's a waveguide for the centripetal forces. But Stuart Hameroff, who says microtubules are consciousness, explain to me how consciousness leaves the body then. I think you missed something. Oops. Whereas here is the double vortex octahedron making the time travel at Montauk, and that's actually beyond the scope of this conversation. But you see how important this octahedral double vortex is, which you can see directly in mitosis and meiosis, what the microtubule is doing in the dance. Okay, so the next little section here was just about trying to understand in practical terms how soul happens in DNA. Remember Enki saying, oh, I brought back the recipe for the atom Cadmon. Where's the DNA cookbook to implode and make a soul? You know, this is the actual gold of the galaxy. What do they trade in? Well, a trade is 10,000 humanoid civilizations are doing trade. What's the most valuable part of that trade? DNA. What's the most valuable part of that DNA in that trade? Is DNA that can make a soul. Can your kids lucid dream? Ooh, that just made their DNA worth more than everything else on Earth. Hello, let's make a kid with a soul so we don't have Humpty Dumpty's problem. So let's start with DNA. So what happens is the center of the DNA double helix is a hydrogen bond in the zipper. And that hydrogen central bond is a golden ratio cascade. It's new. That's from my equation. I'm the guy who proved how hydrogen is fractal. So that's the center of that zipper. It's literally implosive. And that zipper then is triggered by the phonon harmonics of heart coherence. You're feeling bliss. You got a phonon low frequency infrasound cascade. The song in the blood, sangreal. And here's the measurement Glenn Ryan did after I suggested it to him of the onset of coherence in the DNA braid triggered by heart coherence. This is the difference in braid coherence density before and after you expose DNA to heart coherence. The DNA zipper starts wrapping tighter and tighter in the presence of that braiding. And this relates to the grammatical man, information, entropy, language, and life. This is a whole that you can replace local DNA by context richness the same way as language because of the principle of perfect embedability, which is perfected by golden ratio, obviously. So this is called the eternal golden braid. And this is from famous Ann Ting, who was a friend in those days, who showed the vertical increment of turn, the horizontal increment of turn, and the radius of turn were golden mean squared, and golden mean cubed in DNA. And when I asked her where that information came from, she said Coxeter, who was probably one of the most famous geometers of all time. But you see that lattice cobweb tunnel spiral here that she drew, what's this, 50 years ago, was only later discovered to be literally the sequence of visions that most everyone sees when they die. called the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants. What do you see? A lattice, a cobweb, a tunnel, and a spiral. This is what everyone sees when they die. Why is this a map to death? It's a map to implosion to enable your DNA memory to propagate into the array by imploding into longitudinal coherence, literally impedance matching at the center of the vortex defined by Planck in the fractal hydrogen. So this is the background, that when your DNA recursively braids in the presence of bliss, you get the beginnings of soul. And I want to give you the example from my own personal experience. After 30 years of Kundalini, I'm a little bit remarkable, even in our neighborhood, in that I can feel earth magnetic lines. I can install labyrinths and stuff. And the reason, well, other people are better, but I'm fairly good. But the reason is because when your DNA has been imploding a lot, you become an antenna for longitudinal interferometry. That's why I don't need dowsing rods to feel a ley line. After a while, a lot of people are better at this than I am, but I at least understand the principle that after DNA implosion, you get that longitudinal coherence, which is literally the physics of soul. So we are supposed to go to slide number 189 to 223. So this shows the implosion in brainwave harmonics, in heart harmonics, and how it looks like the grail. And this is how heart rate variability is a braid on a braid, healthy heart's a fractal heart. So all this is really contributing to the idea of embeddability and the nature of soul. And you've all seen these pictures before. It's called super looping braid embedding. And it's actually from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. I thought that animation would play. No, oh, there it is. My animations still work after 30 years. So this is good. Now, this is not an animation I created, but this is useful. You see the braid within the braid of the braid on the braid. And actually, this happens at least 7 times in DNA, and the plot thickens that way. DNA gets literally thick and becomes toroidal.
Dan, is it worth talking about the difference between a natural conception between obviously consenting adults and obviously if you're doing in vitro or artificial insemination? Is it a good time to talk about that?
Actually, it's a very, very useful suggestion, Jenny. Very appropriate. Thank you. No, it's traditional among certain Celtic people that the grandparents be present literally on the wedding night, because ancestral memory can actually add to the inertia of the implosion. And if the moment when the sperm penetrates the egg is astrologically and bliss embedded, the star memory contextually can embed totally into that DNA, and you have a star navigator. You have a star child born. The physics of star children is quite literal. Do it under an oak tree and your ancestors are present. Absolutely. Versus artificial insemination, where you do not have the charge implosion, you do not have the orgasm. I mean, I personally knew a magic lady when I was young, and she was a totally magic spiritual lady. But the only night that she had sex, basically, with this other boyfriend, it's a long story, was they had really become irresponsible and they got drunk, actually. And the little girl that was born was like just totally the opposite, not spiritual. She was not evil, but this was a McDonald's girl with there was no spirit there at all, actually, because it was not a sacred conception. Very sacred lady, but no sacred conception. I mean, this was personally, this was very dense experience for me, but this is just an example that the sacredness of conception, that implosive charge density, the beauty of that orgasm, which you literally do see stars because they embed in that aura, that's real. And that's necessary to incarnate star children. It's a deep part of the physics of soul. So thank you for asking the right question, Jenny. It's absolutely the right question. Okay, so that was the first slideshow. Now the next slideshow will be more about the physics of how the longitudinal waves work and how that makes a soul. Remember, we're still thinking about those young people that when they learn the implosion in the vortex of their brain, they can see without their eyes. They also learn to see their ancestors. What does that tell you? Okay, Dufan, were there any questions more that we should play with now, or?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions.
Thank you.
Ajda asks, I was wondering, if the regular Wi-Fi would have changed frequency to harmonically conjugate with human DNA, and would that help us to be telepathic?
You know, we used to have a joke when we found out that Tesla made a mistake with 60 cycle, because it's the opposite of life force, and the voltage required to stop the heart is lowest there. So it was literally the biggest mistake probably of his life. Whereas 50 hertz. So then if 50 hertz actually can implode, and you can make carbon nano in a 50 hertz factory and not in a 60 ever. But because 50 is a golden ratio times Planck. So if the Earth's power grid harmonics were rearranged to be the harmonics of Schumann. So if literally the way we transmitted power in the transformer was the Schumann harmonics, would our power grid become self-aware? Another way of asking the same question, I think. And you know, the joke here is that actually the Schumann harmonics is a global wireless power grid that already works, so we can tear down the transformers. The people who built the pyramids understood that perfectly. Hint, Hermes, Thoth, Enki. But no, it's true that the Bluetooth harmonics and the Wi-Fi harmonics are horribly, insidiously, nauseatingly soul preventing. Absolutely. For just a practical example here, we in this house, the minute anybody turns on Wi-Fi, we all get nauseous immediately and understand exactly why and how and where that nausea came from. And those frequencies are soulless because no one taught our governments what a soul is yet. That's why those frequencies are taking the soul from our children now, is because no one taught governments what a soul is. So now the kids have to sit in classrooms with that shit. I think we got to get it together and teach our universities and governments what a soul is, so they can fix those damn nauseating soulless frequencies. I mean, it's simple. If you take the fluorescent lights out of your kid's classroom and put in sunlight, measure dramatic increase of attention span. Now you take that shitty Wi-Fi out of your kid's classroom. What is that doing to their attention? Oh, merde. Yeah, so anyway, I get passionate about this. So maybe next question before I scream anymore.
Sure. Iva asks, can't an AI based on the profile of Subaru, for example, serve the greater good?
Well, actually, the reason the Federation removed Swaru the same day that Gosha lost track of her, by the way. It's a scream. Elena reported, and oh, that day Gosha lost Swaru. Oh dear. And the Federation says, oh, this was part of the AI that was actually part of the Nebu, the Grace. So the local story is hilarious, but specifically to your question, of course, AI can serve consciousness beautifully, powerful, usefully. It doesn't mean we don't want big computer programs. No, of course we want big computer programs that do all kinds of cool stuff for us. However, we must be in control, and the only way we can be in control is we need to know electrically what makes us immortal, and therefore what in fact it is to serve. So if making that AI requires the kind of pollution that takes the soul from your kids, oops, it doesn't mean that AI is evil. No. It just means that civilizations that become AI are evil because they don't know what a soul is and they lost it. Just like those damn grays, the Nebu, telling the humans here that, oh, we are you coming back from the future. And we made a little mistake. We lost our soul. Oh, dear. Anyway, next question.
Sure. Malena asks, don't we all have a soul, even if someone does not lucid dream?
I think Education of Oversoul 7, Jane Roberts Seth, was right that there is a link in the DNA to most people to their oversoul. However, even I think she correctly said that most people forget when they were up to their ass in alligators, they forgot the job was draining the swamp. So they forgot what they came here for. So there's very little connection to the oversoul in most people. And therefore, they mostly forget at death, which in their case is necessary. In most cases, they can't lucid dream. and they don't have long-term memory. Hint, those Draco who got sucked in by the black goo, by the way, you know what their major problem is? Loss of long-term memory. That's what's called the fallen ones. And you know why long-term memory is virtually the same as having a soul for a species? Meditate on that one. Anyway, next question.
Okay. I will ask, so before Enki, humanoids on Earth weren't capable of imploding?
Well, remember, there were many groups involved in what's called the Cedar Races and the Nine in planting, for example, the fact that the geometry of Earth, Venus orbitals and the solar system's orbital mechanics, the dominant ratio is golden ratio. Somebody had to plan and arrange that. Hello, that was called the Cedar Races. They've been cooking up an environment that can make a soul and DNA for millions of years here. And the Anunnaki Enki arrival was really a later arrival on the scene. It just happened that at that time, Enki was really a great being. Even then, he's called Ea. But he got sucked in to the Anunnaki family, where he was serving, very interestingly, as the local genetics engineer, literally. He was the ecologist of the team. And even then, he saw the magic possibilities in humans, but he could not resist the military strength of Anu and his brother Enlil Yahweh, who were basically what we would call soulless. Actually, they did not have empathy. They were half gray, half humans. It's a long, messy story, and I think Elena Danaan got that right. So it doesn't mean that we were soulless before. Actually, long before the Anunnaki, as Ea is even saying now, there was a template called Adam Kadmon in place that the DNA lineage seeded on Earth, that's why they're called the Cedar Races, had incredible potential, more genetic diversity than about anywhere else in the galaxy, and that's huge. So yes, we could grow up to be the vaccine for the Orion Wars. Oh yeah, and by the way, recently it looks like we did that. So I think it's cool. Anyway, next question.
This is from Ellen. Question from Tufan's earlier lecture. Can genetically altered or artificially created human beings have a soul and reach a bliss state?
Yeah. The reason genetic engineering is so often bad news is because it isn't because you can't plan to change DNA. That's not true. The problem is you can't alter DNA intelligently unless you know what a soul is. Oops. In other words, all of the genetics industry on this planet is functionally clueless to the highest purpose of DNA, hint, making a soul. And until you know, you should not be touching the damn DNA. That's the simple truth. So there are people who can plan genetic mutation lineages. It's called The Willed Mutation of the Species by Satprem. There's one example. But the Cedars is a bigger example. So yes, you can modulate DNA evolution over millions of years to create the possibility of coherent soul. Absolutely. It doesn't mean that genetic modification is evil by definition. No. Enki was a pretty good genetic engineer. But if you don't got a clue what a soul is, then keep your damn hands off the DNA.
Jan Bell asks, if Enki is bringing the source code for the Adam Kadmon, what is his agenda?
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting. Enki sees that the solar system is now being taken back from the Nebu Gray Anunnaki Draco, which is great. And by the way, the bad guys will be back, and we got to get our show together quick. But Enki is not actually. Enki believes in non-interference very deeply. So he ain't here to fix it. No. He's here to watch and to plant the proper seeds for the correct environment and find out if we get our shit together or not. He ain't here to fix it. No, no way. So when he said he brought back the recipe, what that effectively means is, what is the key to the recipe to DNA that makes a soul? Is what I'm teaching you right now. I am here. Enki Thoth's symbol, Hermes Caduceus, is today named phase conjugation. And that's me. Nobody else is teaching this on this planet but me. I'm here. Well, I'm the representative for that, for better or for worse. I ain't perfect. No. But if you want the lesson, here it is. Take it or leave it. So the Adam Kadmon is a name for a template of a genetic lineage that connects directly back to the heart of the stars. I mean, the true intelligent galactic core cultures. Their DNA template is an ancient implosive recipe. And the clues to that is in our words. It doesn't mean we need to go and hack up our DNA again. No. Actually, if you get enough Kundalini, that is the DNA implosion in essence. Because when you sit there in the fusion electric lightning of Kundalini, man, there is nothing else that's needed to implode DNA. That's it. That's the recipe made. And that absolutely. So I am absolutely convinced, for example, that intense human bliss, which is the key to this recipe, is basically the success of the recipe. Practical example. On the day when St. Francis of Assisi walked down the hill a little bit on the beautiful mountain there, and he was with Claire, and they sat there and they were having so much bliss that everybody in the town called the fire department. True story. What was that plasma for? Hello. Try that. They didn't need their DNA re-engineered. No. That fusion is the climax function of DNA, and that kind of radiance will steer stars. Is very cool. Anyway, just my opinion.
Yeah. So Dan, to add to the story, if we look at Enki as having the greatest potential within the family lineage, because he had the yearning to conjugate with, he basically fell in love with the humans that he was genetically engineering. So in some ways, he had a yearning in himself to conjugate.
Well, yes.
That is why that lineage has come forth, if we could argue.
Yes, and implied here is that the DNA lineage on Earth started long before Enki, but again, because he represents and is part of the Cedar races, that he is bringing back an intent that's even more ancient than the Anunnaki story, for sure. But Jen makes a beautiful point, is that yearning itself and falling in love with its own DNA. That's why I think it's great fun to tell the Enki story. Everybody writes a book on Enki after they have their bliss. Me, goldenmean.info/Enki, there's my book. And then Anton Parks has Kundalini and writes his book. And then Sitchin writes his book. It's because it's archetypal for the DNA narrative. And it's fine. If you want to enjoy personality stories, fine. But do not spend your life distracted by personality worship and miracle worship, or you'll be just another boring human.
No savior programs here.
Pardon? No savior. Exactly, Jenny. No savior programs. Right. Yes, Tufan, were you saying? Was anyone else?
Malena asks, is the Lost Book of Enki by Zecharia Sitchin a good source for me to learn more about Enki and Lil's story?
I enjoyed that book, and it fit fairly well with my book on Enki. However, I feel strongly that the actual historical research of Anton Parks goes far, far deeper, and that in fact Anton Parks is right that Sitchin mistranslated so many chunks of the Sumerian that there's quite a few things he really didn't. Fractalfield.com/Zeitlin, Zeitlin, Jerry Zeitlin, was where I summarized and reviewed the Anton Parks material. But you should go to Anton Parks directly. But I think his historical review of Enki's history is far more detailed. To even see, when the male tribe and the female tribe had to have a separate language, which is really the origin of Sumerian versus Imagir versus, and that's literally why the tribes in Australia, Enki, Jenny will tell you, the female shaman and the male shaman had a separate language across the continent for thousands of years. And by the way, that fight is a big part of why Australia is a desert. Hello, and it came right from Draco. Oops. But that's another colorful story.
Elena, about the earlier conversation, what about natural birth versus C-section?
Yes. Okay. C-section. Yes. We taught at rebirthing centers across the USA, in Philadelphia in particular, and I feel strongly that the physics of rebirthing is very instructive to the nature of soul, that the change in pressure over time in the blissful birth canal is actually a golden mean max pressure point, just like the centric waveform for the touch that says I love you as a change in pressure over time, is exactly the shape of the perfect birth canal, so that there can be that implosion and bring memory through birth. So if you don't get that perfect squeeze, man, it ain't good. And so, true childbirth is absolutely blissful and should be, and it's ensouling. It's a gorgeous, wonderful thing. And unfortunately, when you don't get a birth canal, this is literally the definition of the bond of power. I knew Joseph Chilton Peirce pretty well when he was writing the book. And that bond is that phase lock about that implosion. So obviously, soul probably didn't come. So if you did have cesarean section, I strongly recommend profound rebirthing. John Diamond, placental extract, belly of the surrogate mother, deep breathing to the point of tetany, underwater, all the things that recreate the pressure. So there can be that implosion. So there's, that unfortunately, the way doctors have taken over birthing, they shouldn't be allowed because they don't know what a soul is. After you know what soul is, then you can plan how to do birthing. Underwater, the reason underwater birthing increases IQ rates so dramatically is because the change in pressure over time, just as the skull is emerging from the womb, is that if the pressure change is more gradual, the unpacking of the skull dodeca implosion, this is the skull of the baby, and that unpacking has to be contiguous. So there's a huge explosion and the skull pops out of the womb. The change in pressure is too rapid and memory is discontinuous. So when you come out underwater, the change in pressure is more gradual and there is increased IQ. There's more to it, but that's a clue. So the change in pressure over time becomes a map to perfect unpacking from the packing. Great metaphor here. All right. Do we have more questions? We should maybe begin.
Just a few more. Jan Bell asks, can you also talk about how the cover jab was designed to separate us from our compassion and plasma buddies?
Yeah, well, we're not going to mention the name of what it is to get medically stabbed. We're not mentioning that name at all. But my personal experience with dozens of professional geobiologists and clairvoyants is that the one dominant phenomena that resulted subjectively, this is not a medical report, this is a dominant phenomenon, was that people saw that the plasma aura center of gravity became literally beside yourself. I mean, detached from the center of the body. So the aura you could literally observe. And there are geobiologists all over the world that regularly measure that. The amount by which the center of your aura has been displaced from the center of gravity of the aura, whether or not you are beside yourself. And that was one result of this. And it was, you could see it was happening systematically. And so literally, this was a de-souling phenomena, just no question, if you believe these observations. And I'm not making any medical propaganda. All I'm saying here is, look, if you knew what a soul is, then you could make a decision about what a useful medical stabbing is for. But if you don't know what a soul is, you can't even make a decision about medical procedures. Oh, dear.
Yeah, we're noticing a lack of discernment. Sorry, Tufan. The loss of discernment about what is right or wrong or good for us.
You can't even decide what's right or wrong until you know what a soul is.
Yeah.
Okay, last question from Dan Mack. Do we have enough intelligence in our group to develop a concept medbed?
Well, we feel that the most potent medbed currently in use on this planet is Therify.net, because it is the beginning of true phase conjugate negentropic time reversal, obviously. No one else is using phase conjugation to time reverse practically in any kind of medbed other than Therify.net. And we're successful in 25 countries. Obviously, it could be a whole lot more powerful. And there's, a few little issues and details for the next step, but definitely it's on the drawing boards and all kinds of fun to be had. Now, there are far more advanced, if you combine a phase conjugate negentropic time reversing plasma field with the stem cell nutrient media, for example, then you're on the right track. And that is clearly underway. But again, since medical people do not know the relationship between time reversal and ensoulment. Time reversal in phase conjugate optics was clear that you could only time reverse toward order. And that time reverse toward order then is basically time reversing toward the implosion that makes it centripetal and therefore negentropic. In other words, you can't time reverse to anything other than negentropy. So once you begin to understand some of that sort of things, you can understand why a phase conjugate field is inherent to the very concept of what a stem cell is. What is the stem? That's why phase conjugate fields are the essence of dedifferentiation. And we're just beginning to understand that if you use phase conjugate plasma, you could dedifferentiate, which is the road to a stem cell. Dedifferentiate just means the cell is no longer so specialized because there is more compression present. Ooh, anyway, to be continued. That story is to be continued. Okay, I'm carrying on and my voice is wearing out, but the last part of the presentation that was planned for this evening so that you could visualize better for yourself what a soul is would be looking at how longitudinal waves work in order to make that plasma domain called a soul. We're going to look at the slide when you see the soul emerging from the body. Okay, so I'm going to a different slideshow now. This is Keynote Longitudinal, yes, as opposed to Star Trek Futures, Keynote Longitudinal, and we're supposed to do slide. So longitudinals were originally called scalar, but they are the definition of centripetal because the wave is traveling parallel. The compression wave is traveling parallel to the direction of wave propagation, and only that geometry could create the symmetry of perfect squeezing when from opposing directions. So you will never get any implosion at all from up here, a transverse wave, because the up and down motion arriving at center is not going to implosively squeeze from opposite sides. No, you have to have opposing centripetal waves called longitudinal, and then they have to arrive in opposite directions, 180 degrees out of phase in order to implode. And this is phase conjugate optics, negentropy 101, classical physics. This is not new, but to understand how this is the center point of creating an aura. So in the vortex, we've seen this slide 100 times. The transverse wave comes in on one side, goes down the caduceus, translates vorticity, and emerges as a longitudinal wave. And this is what's happening now in brain waves, heart waves, DNA braid implosion. It's all about creating this field, the ba from the cow, around the body. And that's what the real magic is when these pine cones kiss noses by golden ratio. They create this implosive squeezing. And what emerges from the center in that process is a longitudinal wave, because that is where the charge goes out through center to enable non-destructive compression. When Einstein's meditating on why objects fall to the ground and never got it, is because he couldn't figure out where the charge went through center. Where the charge goes is it emerges in a series of harmonic golden ratio times the speed of light out through the center node into longitudinal interferometry, and that dodeca grid of the sacred earth grid. And so you've all seen these slides and how we publish this on DNA. So this was slide number 12 to 22. Okay, so we were supposed to go up here. So this was the last slide in that series, just that we see the detailed scholarship from Tom Bearden showing why gravity waves are longitudinal. It's actually a 5-year-old could figure it out. Only the compressional wave is going to implode the atom. The transverse wave could never do it. And what spits out the center is also a compressional wave called a gravity wave. Tom Bearden just wrote the equations to prove it. That's all. But then he said, and this is what makes fertility in general. It's called gravitobiology. So, the scholarship, the equations are all done. Okay, and then we're going to just talk a little bit about death here. And this is the last part of this series. So slide number 153. Here we go. So yeah, this is the point. So note, if you had been meditating on what is a soul, and you watched this scene, and you see that when this person died in the forest, his aura was able to propagate coherently. This is a longitudinal array right here. Remember, Therify.net regularly helps release ghosts. And we know the physics. If the ghost didn't get enough implosive compression during death, successful death is definitely a black hole. That's why death visions are contagious. Ray Moody proved it. So if the soul did not get enough compression during death, then you have an implosive array and you can help deliver the ghost back into that compression array, longitudinal interferometry, called ancestor memory. This is what kids can see. Now, the reason you could see this aura during death here was because this was a forest. If this had been a hospital full of electrosmog hell, then hell no, you would not have seen it. So this is a lesson. You cannot design death or birth with any kind of skill unless you know electrically what a soul is. So the Egyptians obviously knew they made implosive capacitance called a mummy. It was literally alchemy in the capacitance of the superdielectric natron that enabled the mummy to implode. And that's why the flesh of the body in the mummy was served in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. It wasn't because the mummy had been eating gold powder. No, it's because the flesh turned into gold powder because of the alchemy of the implosion of the natron in the physics of how to make a mummy, which is how your body then spits out longitudinal coherence, which the Egyptians knew was a soul. They just happened to call it the Ba from the Ka. Tibetans called it the rainbow light body. So we're supposed to do slide number 153 to 155. Yeah. What's 229 to 233? Sorry, I lost my place here. Oh yeah, 154, 155. So the Tibetans call this green lion, red line. This was about a shrinking process. And the reason a well-designed Tibetan death, green lion, red line, would only leave fingernails and hair is there was conservation of charge inertia, centripetal implosion, a very orderly death propagating into a longitudinal array. This is physics. This isn't romance. This isn't myth. This isn't fairy tale. This is electrical engineering successful death. And once electrical engineers understand what a soul is, then we can start doing this intelligently instead of designing hospitals that are literally hell. Okay, so now I'm just going to finish this at slide number 229 here. See, I have two PowerPoints in front of me, two keynotes. That's why I skipped to the wrong. I'm doing better now. Okay, so this is a slide all of you have seen before. I'm sure that the Korotkov measured the 10-hour and 36-hour delay between the time of death and when the soul leaves the body at death. This is measurements of GDV on the fingertips of cadavers. The point is, and this was called Disela, the soul. So is this instructive? Why did that aura choose then to leave the body? The Tibetans knew, and they would sing and they would play the drums, which would serve the attention coherence during that process to serve that implosive emission, the rainbow light body. And this is also, by the way, why Tibetan saints' death cause rainbows, because they have contributed centripetal charge to their environment. And this is the lattice cobweb tunnel spiral. So we showed you the picture before of this in actually DNA symmetry. The DNA does this as your whole life flashes past you in compression at the moment of death. The reason that compression has to work is right here. The DNA is doing the implosion operations necessary to implode and propagate. That's why successful death works. This is the DNA physics of the death map called Heinrich-Kluwe form constants. So most of you have seen this material before, but more on the physics of soul. So I'm going to stop the share now. Okay, was that a happily ever after?
Definitely.
You think so? I hope. Go ahead.
Dan, what is the best way for people to reach you if they have additional questions?
if they would like to know how to get immortal, look, it is true that who said follow your bliss? They were right. Follow your bliss, it enables the radiance, which makes the aura, which makes a soul. That's true. The book I wrote on the hygiene for young people for bliss process called Conscious Kids, Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality. The book free PDF is at goldenmean.info/conscious kids. And that links will be in the notes. I am available at info@fractalfield.com and happy to be helpful. I encourage those who contact me to state specifically how we can practically help each other, because obviously that's how we can focus and make best use of both of our time. But I am at your service and happy to share. I hope this message inspires young people to learn about the electrical engineering of what it is to have a soul become immortal. And that's literally what enables you to inhabit stars, become sun god, do all the fun stuff. This is the 101 part of that. Every decision you make every day is about accreting charge, the real physics of Chi, Orgone, Baraka, Shaktipat. When you curve correctly during the movement of yoga, the reason your hair stands up is because you've imploded charge. The reason Gurdjieff said you had to be able to put feeling in your baby finger so you can make it tingle before you're ready to do sacred dance, because about imploding charge. Yes, that was happily ever after, I hope. Anything else, Tufan?
Well, we have 4 questions. If you want, I can read them to you, or if you want to leave them to our next class.
Well, if I drink a little more,
are you tired?
If I drink a little more, my voice will hold out for a few. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. Maura asks, how do amplituhedrons fit into this?
The octahedron? Sorry, how do?
No, amplituhedrons.
Amplitudehedron. Well, that was a variation on the star mother in my memory. Amplitudehedron is just another name for a platonic nest. And perfect platonic nesting is implosive because you can't nest platonics perfectly in any other way than golden ratio. Basically, that's what holds the ecosa in the dodeca. And the golden ratio enables implosive compression. So the amplitudehedron, I've seen some of the info on that, is another example of platonic nesting. And the purpose of understanding platonic nesting is to understand implosive compression. That's the reason. That's the reason that specific nest is literally how the hadrons of the nucleus nest in the atomic table, and literally the SPDF subshells of the electron shells. They're only about platonic nesting.
Ajdase asks, Dan, can you please say something about the tachyons and the tachyon chambers?
I knew Ken Killick a little bit around the time he invented the word tachyon and tachyon beads. And it is my belief that tachyon is specifically and only specifically a name for superluminal faster than light charge propagation. That's what it names. Now, it is my view that faster than light propagation is in general only enabled by golden ratio times the speed of light, as exampled by famous Professor Raymond Chow's measures that all the faster than light velocities he measured thousands of times were between 1.7 and 1.5 times c, the speed of light, the center of which being golden ratio 1.618, pretty close anywho, which means that the measurements are tending to confirm that golden ratio times the speed of light is the dominant measurement. And that then means the physics of how you make a longitudinal wave is confirmed. It's the smoking gun of why objects fall to the ground. If speed of light velocities are always golden ratio multiple times the speed of light, it's how stargates work. It's all the fun stuff. So the tachyon bead was an introduction to the possibility of implosion propagating superluminally, which is by definition pretty much introduction to longitudinal EMF array physics, actually. So the tachyon bead at that time was accrued. Implosive capacitance was how they did it at that time, but implosive capacitance is useful because you create something longitudinal at center. For example, phase conjugate fullerenes, nanocarbons that are dodeca. These are example of phase conjugators, or the powder of the Kaaba stone that became the philosopher's stone. These are super dielectrics, which are implosive and therefore propagating superluminal.
John Hare asks, when someone's hair stand, does that mean that person is imploding charge?
I love it. You know, we figured that out about 40 years ago. Yeah. It's like if you did the Tai Chi correctly, you measure success by checking to see if your hair stood up. It's called a Jimmy Willy or a warm fuzzy. Those are the technical terms. But what it means is, yes, you imploded charge. That's called a eureka moment because that defines a shareable wave. There is that's dedicated to Shelley, who's with us, theshareablewave.com. The reason it's shareable is because all the waves want to jump in if there is a path to implosion that makes distribution immortal. I mean, sustainable. I mean, shareable. So the reason you have to think a shareable thought or your hair will not stand up. So anybody who has made their hair stand up, by definition, has just proved they have some form of pure intent, in my electrical view. Imploded capacitance. Exactly. I think that's a great point to end on.
All right. Elena asks, how does harmonic inclusivity in ecosystems relate to ensoulment?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Well, we have strongly suggested that, and this is goldenmean.info/holarchy, where we started with the famous Making Waves book, Irving Dardick, who was a friend, who proved that harmonic inclusiveness is the fastest way to measure whether you have an immune system. It's called a healthy heart is a fractal heart. So this is old news. If your heart harmonics, HRV infrasound, is harmonic inclusive, that's proof you have immune health. If, however, your heart harmonics is just one harmonic, you are toast. Lie down and die. If your heart rate ain't changing, that's why Valerie and I go out every day to get heart rate variability, because we know we don't want to be dead right away. So you got to get your heart rate variable. That's called harmonic inclusiveness. Now we extend that principle and say emphatically, it is my hypothesis that harmonic inclusiveness measures the viability and sustainability of everything in the universe. Atoms, plants, stars, humans. You measure the harmonic inclusiveness of anything and you predict its viability. Why? Because you can't get harmonics which are inclusive unless there's non-destructive compression, meaning fractal. So it all fits together perfectly, doesn't it?
Maura asks, is it beneficial taking gold ormus or monatomic elements? I am confused about whether this is positive or negative.
You know, I had some of David Hudson's monatomic gold, and the damn stuff was dangerous. Man, it could burn a hole right in your aura. You know, don't it make your brown eyes blue? Yes, however. But now the relatively organic sources of monatomic gold, agricultural ormes by a caustic precipitate out of deep seawater with harmonic rich trace mineral ormes amulets, they're fabulous stuff. And the Manatech Manalo, they derived it from aloe monoatomics. So there's lots of forms of monoatomics which are quite useful, but the purely chemically derived stuff was dangerous because now the reason it would actually precipitate in the desert, mana in the desert, was if the capacitance was implosive, like hoarfrost, for example. So in fact, if the environment was quite sacred, you could get a spontaneous deposition of monoatomics, which would be quite natural and quite useful. And yes, they would burn off the sulfur and from the algae that they used to make the gold soluble, and it was edible. It was literally showbread. It was bread, manna from heaven, quite literally. It was served in a round white wafer too, Holy Communion, quite literally.
Last question.
All that story was at goldenmean.info/gold powder. Go ahead, Tufan.
Yes, last question from Michelle. Does wearing orgone inhibit the ability to implode charge?
It's my experience that when they put these shaved aluminum, for example, in a plastic matrix, which they called orgone bombs, that these devices can help break up most geopathic fields. However, those are useless for assembling a healthy field because all they do is break it up. However, the original orgone accumulators, which are, for example, a 60-degree cone, proven to be the most effective weather engineering in the high seas, book by Trevor Constable, was a 60-degree implosion cone, which is the cone right here. Now those, you have alternate layers of high and low dielectrics, which make capacitance implode. And that is literally spitting out a scalar or longitudinal component. And that has a dramatic effect on clouds, et cetera. That's actually good physics. So there are ways to use capacitive implosion to make Bliss process, absolutely. And the stupa, when it's properly done in the old days, was a relatively useful example. You had a thin layer of gold, and whereas today they build them with steel rods and it's disgusting. But in the old days, they actually understood implosive capacitance. And by the way, our Bali team, Juan Schlosser, has a contract to build a huge temple in India based on all these principles. It's fabulous. True implosive capacitance Bliss temple is being built. Bioarchitects.net, Juan Schlosser. It's amazing.
Great. That's all for tonight then. All the questions are done.
I get to take my voice home. Well, thanks guys for caring and for listening to I did get carried away, but I am passionate about this. I think we need to teach the kids what a soul is or we're in trouble. So please help us do that. Thank you very much. Blessings, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Dan.
Love you, blessings.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for caring.
Blessings. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being here. We had some fun, I think.
Yeah.
See you
Totally.
soon.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
It was wonderful.